Welcome to all the participants, and thank you for being with us today. I'm Caterina Marinetti, and I work as Scientific Project Manager for the NEWAVE Innovative Training Network. Today is the 8th appointment of the thematic seminar series as part of the NEWAVE Diffused conference, which started at the beginning of April and will be accompanying us until the end of the year with bi-weekly online webinars. The thematic seminars feature the NEWAVE early stage researchers who will guide us through the key water governance aspects that they have been investigating during the NEWAVE project. Today's seminar will start with Shahana Bilalova lecture titled Successful Governance Pathways Across Problem Context, a Global QCA Analysis. Together with Shahana, we welcome her primary PhD supervisor Jens Neuwig, full professor of water governance and sustainability at Leuphana University of Lunenburg. And the invited discussants, Graham Epstein, research assistant professor at Waterloo University with expertise in the human dimension of conservation and natural resources management, and Colin Herron, senior water resources management specialist, water solutions for the SDGs at the Global Water Partnership. I kindly remind you that you can submit your questions anytime during the seminar using the Q&A function. And I will now invite Professor Jens Neuwig to introduce Shahana and her work. Thank you so much and enjoy the seminar.
Thank you very much, Caterina. This is such a nice occasion here, and I really like this format of the diffused conference because it gives the early stage researchers, the ESRs, as it's called in the EU speak, the chance to present their work after, let's say, the core project activities had already finished. So I think this is a really great opportunity, and it's really nice that there's so many people also listening in and watching today. So very warm welcome also from my side. Yes, so as a first supervisor of Shahana, let me just to say a few words, very few words, so that Shahana has lots of more time to really say something substantial on her findings. Just a mini bio. Shahana has got an interdisciplinary background. So she's got a bachelor in international studies from the ADA University in Azerbaijan, where she's from. Also with a semester in Korea in between. She went on to have her master in science or Master of Science in Environmental Sciences and Policy from the Central European University. And almost from there, she became an early stage researcher in the NEWAVE network here in Lüneburg in our research group. And I think it was October 2020, right? So almost 4 years ago. That she started here. And most of the time, also because it was COVID, obviously, Shahana stayed here in our group. Nonetheless, she managed to do a secondment with the Global Water Partnership in Stockholm, which was a very productive stay because there's also one publication coming out of that. Within the NEWAVE network, Shahana was supervised by Sergio Villamayor Thomas from the Autonomous University of Barcelona. Yeah, and just a couple of months ago, Shahana submitted her PhD thesis. It was entitled, or is entitled, Towards Sustainable Water Governance, Paradigms, Context, and Sustainability Performance. And that title also gives two important keywords. So one is sustainability performance, and the other is paradigms. So sustainability performance, as also in the talk today, has been really central to Shahana's work. So I already mentioned the study she did with the Global Water Partnership, where I was also involved. And the idea here was to look at the core paradigm of integrated water resources management, IWRM, and like its global importance, and how countries with more or less implementation of integrated water resources management have more or less successful let's say, water governance. So she was comparing and correlating and running regressions with scientific data, but also with governance data. So really looking at the performance aspect here, but also as the paradigms, at the paradigms aspect. So in her work, and she was doing a couple of systematic reviews also, like one of the methods that Shahana really dug into. One was more general on sustainable water governance literature, but also one was on the use of paradigms within or water governance paradigms in the literature, and what role that that could play. So, and in that, Shahana was also like a really active member of the sort of the research group on water governance paradigms in the NEWAVE team, but also she was a member of the patterns group, and her work also links to the third aspect in the NEWAVE network, which is problematics. So problematics, paradigms, and patterns all play a role in her work, actually. So, and with that, I think without further ado, I'll give the floor to you, and I'm very happy that you'll be able to present the paper using also the qualitative comparative analysis, the QCA method, again, looking at sort of the success of water governance across the world. So thank you. And yeah, Shahana, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Jens, for this very nice introduction, and also giving a brief synopsis of the topic that I will be discussing today. So maybe I can share my screen first, and yeah, and maybe as a tradition, I can ask if you can see my screen. Now, okay, cool.
Yes.
Yeah. So yeah, thank you for the introduction again. And in this seminar series, I will be walking you through one of the papers that we worked on during my PhD together with Jens Nevik and also Nicolas Jaga and Sergio Villamayor-Thomas, who is my third supervisor that Jens mentioned. And I'm very excited to present this study with you, and also getting feedback from Graham and Colin, and also to hear from you as an audience what's your reflections and if you have any questions, because it's a nice opportunity, I think, to share the results in this stage and also getting the feedback. So before starting with the results of the study, maybe it's better if I start with the rationale of the study, why we did this study. So it's widely acknowledged that the governance is a very crucial element once we discuss the sustainability of natural resources, including the water resources. And it's widely acknowledged that the global water crisis is a governance crisis. So it's in the reports of UNDP and also in Global Water Partnership, it's also widely mentioned. So governance is a very important element. And once the importance of governance is acknowledged, we also saw the emergence of multiple governance approaches across the globe, and also their application and also promotion of these approaches. And some of these approaches are actually applied and promoted without any critical reflection on their appropriateness to the context that they are applied. As a result, we can see some of these approaches were successful in one context, but not very successful in other contexts. So there is always this variety of their effectiveness. But at the same time, we see that they're implemented in very different ways in some contexts. So they're interpreted differently and they're implemented differently. So that these paradigms that Jens mentioned, so they can also be framed as a governance approaches. So they are observed in a different way, even though they have the same name. And this ambiguity over the effectiveness of this governance approaches call us to direct our attention to from the paradigms, but to the context as well. So the context matters, we all know that, but it's also important that we understand what kind of governance approaches are applied in different contexts and if they are appropriate or not. And while discussing context, of course, it's important to acknowledge the political, social context, but at the same time to understand the problem context itself. So what kind of problems that we are aiming to address with which tools, governance tools. However, if we look at the governance literature, we can see that, of course, the problem is well acknowledged, but the link between the governance and problem is not very well linked. So there is a gap in the literature that discuss the nexus, let's call it, nexus between the problem context and also the governance approaches. So there is this need that we felt maybe we can address with the study. And as a result, we were interested in of course, to identify governance pathways that contribute to successful water-related environmental sustainability performance in relation to the problems they address. And here, maybe just a definition, what we mean by the governance pathways. So these are the constellation of several governance characteristics that define how the governance is arranged, how it is structured, implemented, how the decisions are made, which actors are involved in the decision making and implementation, which actors are not involved, and what is the interaction between these components that determine the effectiveness of governance in achieving desired outcomes. So that is the definition that we were operationalizing in our study. And in this study, as a main component or focus of the study was a problem. So we were also very much interested in to unpack the linkage between the problem context or nature of the problem context and the successful governance pathway to understand if they're really linked or not, and also to understand the link between these two. So having more in-depth analysis of those. And with this method in mind, with this research aim in mind, we mainly employed qualitative comparative analysis, which is widely used, especially in social sciences and political sciences. So this is a method that enables us to have an in-depth analysis of the causal complexities between the conditions and the outcomes that can be interpreted as a necessity and sufficiency. So to just give you an overview what we mean by necessity and sufficiency. So necessity is the existence of a condition means that the outcome will occur. So without these conditions, the outcome will not occur. Sufficiency is that without this condition, outcome can also occur, but they are, let's say, in combination sufficient for the outcome to occur. And in this study, we took fuzzy set qualitative comparative analysis. So in the crisp set qualitative comparative analysis, we have 0, 1 as a membership score, which means presence or absence. But if you're familiar with the concept in social science, it's very important that we also understand the nuances or rank the conditions between this presence and absence, but to what extent they are full membership or full non-membership. So therefore, we decided to undertake fuzzy set qualitative comparative analysis. And the data for this study is coming from the systematic literature review of 165 empirical water governance studies. And among this, we picked up 43 cases with a complete information on the problem context and also governance system and outcome, which would allow us to understand the linkages. And the cases, regarding the cases, so we had 21 cases on groundwater exploitation for agriculture with 8 success cases, 22 cases on surface water pollution, 10 success cases, and the cases were covering a broad geographical regions. So we had the cases from Asia, Europe, North America, Latin America, Africa, Oceania, and also Middle East. And moving on, now maybe we can look at what kind of conditions we have considered for this analysis. So if we go back to the research aim we had, so we were interested in to understand the governance pathways that are successful in addressing problem context. So if we look at the aim, we can see we have 3 main components. We have governance conditions, we have problem conditions, and we have the outcome. And we were interested in to unpack the relationship between the 3 elements. And the governance-related conditions are chosen based on the theory of governance theories that we see in the literature. So these conditions are very much argued to be important for the effectiveness of governance in achieving desired outcome in the literature. So maybe starting with the capacity. here we were interested in to what extent the governance has a capacity in terms of like financial resources or technical information or let's say human capacity. So that was one of the things that we were coding among the cases. So moving on, we had institutional fit. So the fit is between the characteristics of the governance and also biophysical system. And we were interested in 3 types of fit, so spatial fit, functional fit, and temporal fit. And spatial fit corresponds to the fit between the scope of the ecological system and the institution. Functional fit is fit between the functional linkages of the system, natural system, and the institutional arrangement. And we also consider the temporal fit, which is the fit between the rate of environmental changes and a response of the institutions. Another condition that we consider in this study was interplay. And with the interplay, we were interested in to what extent the governance has a coordination across the levels and also across the sectors. And here we also consider the policy alignments as well across levels and also across the sectors. In this study, we were also making some hypotheses while we were considering these conditions. So for instance, for the institution fit, we were hypothesizing positive effect on the outcome, but the effectiveness of the institutional fit is also very much depending on the interplay. So if you don't have a good coordination, without that, institutional fit is not very effective. And for another thing that we considered was decentralization, which is the degree of power that is delegated to the lower level of the governance. So it's not concentrated in one level, but it's more delegated. And again, for decentralization, we were hypothesizing both positive and negative effect because decentralization without the capacity is prone to fail based on the literature. And also another thing was interplay. So without the coordination across the level, the decentralization can also result in the fragmented governance where the efforts are redundant and also not very effective. And the fourth component in the governance-related condition was the participation. So to what extent the non-state actors were involved in the decision-making. And here it was ranging from the non-participation of the non-state actors to the full participation of the non-state actors. So non-state actors having the full power in the decision-making process. And the final component was adaptiveness and knowledge integration, and which comprised of 3 components: flexibility, use of evidence, and knowledge integration. And here with flexibility was that the flexibility of decision making once the new information is available. So to what extent it can maneuver. And use of evidence was the usage of evidence and information in the decision making, and knowledge integration was integration of knowledge, local and also indigenous knowledge. So these were the measured governance related conditions. And I can also maybe just give an overview of the water related problematics and also what we mean by problematique. So the problematique/problem context is we define it as a cluster or ensemble of water related issues in relation to the water resources and the sustainability of the resource connected to the use. So it's based on our one of our previous papers where we did the cluster analysis of the studies of the data that we collected regarding the water use, water sustainability, and also a water resource. And then based on analysis, we identified 5 clusters of the water-related context. And 2 of these clusters we are now using in this study, which is surface water pollution and groundwater exploitation for agriculture. So surface water pollution cluster is mainly characterized by the cases dealing with the water quality issue related to direct discharge of pollutants into the surface water resources, and groundwater exploitation for agriculture is mainly dealing with the cases addressing the quantity aspect of groundwater withdrawal for agriculture activities. So why we chose these 2 problem contexts were out of the 5 that we have identified was mainly due to the number of cases within these clusters, but also the complexity of the problems. So in surface water pollution, if you think about it, it can be very easy problem. Let's say that it's a direct source pollution, and then you can address it by addressing the source of the pollution itself, so by building a treatment plant, let's say. Or it can be very complex, so there might be different interests or different source of pollution with different actors, which can make the problem very complex. And with groundwater exploitation for agriculture, usually the groundwater is a complex resource and very hidden as well. So sometimes it's very difficult to see the scale of the problem and how severe it is before. So in advance, it's very difficult to realize it until it's very late sometimes. And also the people might have a different perception of the problem as well. So some people might consider the problem very severe, but while some other people might not consider it severe. So which also impacts the how fast we can address the problem. So that was one of the reasons that we considered these two problematics. And then by analyzing these conditions, we were very interested in to understand what are the governance pathways, let's say constellation of these conditions that lead to certain sustainability outcomes, and with them maybe to also define the outcome, what we mean by it, that so we were interested in success and failure, and what is success is that whether the governance intervention led to a positive outcome in terms of a state of water resources. So let's say in terms of water quality or water quantity, or if the intervention led to pollution or solved the pollution or led to replenishment of the groundwater sources or exploitation of groundwater sources. So that was the main aspect that we were interested in. So it was mainly environmental aspect of water-related sustainability. And then after doing the analysis, the QCA has resulted in 3 solution paths. And if you look at the solution path, we can see that it has a quite high consistency. So it's higher than the threshold of 0.80, and also has a quite large solution coverage. So which means that the solution paths are explaining quite larger share of the cases that we had. And the solutions are also quite variant. So the first and the second solution is on this solution, the pollution of surface water resources. And the last solution passes a quite general one with almost all of the conditions that we had, governance conditions that we had. And in this study, we mainly report on intermediate solutions. So in QCA, if you do the QCA, you can get 3 set of solutions. There are conservative, most parsimonious, and also intermediate solution. And the last solution is that you can also set the expectation by the theories, let's say. So the hypothesis that I mentioned in the beginning, we were also trying to insert this in the analysis that they are more theoretically informed. Therefore, we mainly focus on this solution that we received. And now going to the results that we have, there were several interesting results, but some of them are more worth to report. So starting with the first one, if you recall the research aim, we were interested in linkage between nature of a problem context and the successful governance pathway. So whether there is actually a linkage, and the results show that there is actually a linkage, so that nature of the problem context might influence the successful governance pathway, how this constellation is built. Why we say that? If you recall the solution paths that I showed, so there were 2 solution paths on the surface water pollution, but none we can see on the groundwater resources, groundwater exploitation in agriculture problem. And one of the reasons could be that that's how we interpret this, might be that the nature of groundwater system. So in the beginning, I mentioned how complex and also hidden the nature of groundwater resources are, which makes it very difficult, probably challenging to identify that governance pathway that consistently lead to the successful sustainability performance. So that would be one of the reasons that why we couldn't find any solution paths that had a groundwater that had addressed the groundwater exploitation problem. And another result that supports the linkage between the nature of a problem context and governance is that we have two set of solutions for surface water pollution. One is quite straightforward. So one is with a capacity and decentralization. So if the governance is let's say centralized, so it's the opposite of decentralization, sorry. So if the governance is less decentralized with enough capacity, you can address the surface water pollution. And the second one is more intrinsic combination of factors. So here we see the governance with enough capacity, with the interplay. There is also participation of non-state actors in the decision making, while also having adaptiveness and knowledge integration to have a successful outcome. However, once we look at the solution path, the cases within the solution path, we can see that the nature of problem is changing. So in the first one, with a straightforward approach, I just added two examples there. The first is from the case from Mexico, where there is this surface water pollution resulted from the municipal wastewater discharge. And the solution came from a central government with enough capacity that built treatment plants, and that was enough for addressing the pollution, which was direct source pollution. On the other hand, in the other case, which falls into the second solution path, it's a quite complex one. So it's the case from Canada, St. Lawrence River, and that the pollution was linked to several sources. So there was a source from industrial, municipal, and agricultural sources. So the pollution were coming from these three sectors, and also concerned two governments of Canada and also Quebec. And the impact was also quite multifaceted. So we can see the impact on the river ecosystem, but also on wildlife and plant habitat. So we can see that there are lots of stakes with different actors that might have an interest. So therefore, we can qualify it much more complex pollution problem in comparison to the previous case that I mentioned. And in the result, we can see that this also requires quite complex solution with capacity, interplay. So there should be a coordination across the levels and also sectors. There is a participation of non-state actors, but also there is adaptiveness and knowledge integration as a solution. So we can conclude that the solution path in this case aligns with the nature of the pollution problem that's addressed. Another set of interesting finding was that we also realized how important the governance capacity is. So if we again go back to the solution, we can see that capacity is in all three solution paths. But also once we did the necessity analysis, so necessity is, again, I'm repeating, just recalling this. The necessity is that the condition is necessary, then you have to have the condition for the outcome to occur. So it's very important to have a capacity for the success to happen. That's observed among the cases that we had, which also show that it's standing out among other conditions that we had. None of the conditions were enough for the necessity. And the final finding that we had was that success is not solely reliant on the single condition or governance paradigm. So it's not reliant. We didn't have any solution paths with only decentralization or adaptive capacity, but rather on the interplay and also mutual reinforcement of various conditions. So it also somehow lies with the hypothesis we had that, for instance, governance capacity is important for adaptiveness, because for adaptiveness, you need to have a good monitoring system. And for monitoring system, you need to have enough financial and technical capacity. For decentralization, again, you need to have a good capacity. Let's say you decentralize to the lower levels, but if the lower levels do not have enough, let's say, financial capacity, they cannot implement the decisions. Or participation, again, the same for non-state actors. Granting the decision making is not enough. They should also have enough capacity to implement, and interplay being very important for the successful fit. So here we can see how the governance conditions are also quite reinforcing each other for some of them, and we need to see this interaction between the different governance conditions. And based on the results, we can draw three main lessons. The first one is that the linkage between the nature of the problem context and also successful governance pathway call us to adopt more problem-driven approach while designing the governance solution. So this would allow the policymakers to have more targeted measures, which would enhance their effectiveness of their policies. But for that, we need to understand the nature of the problem. So we need to study what kind of problem is it, how complex it is, and what kind of measures we need to implement. And another lesson that we learn is that without the capacity, enough capacity, strategies that is effective in one context doesn't mean that will be effective in another context. So the importance of capacity is also highlighted in this study. And the final one is that there is no easy solution. So this is also supported by previous studies in the literature that to address, to have like a holistic approach to all the problems, you shouldn't go with an easy solution, but more like a tailored solution. And you also need to understand how these different characteristics interact with each other. So what is the interaction between these so that you can have a more tailored measure and targeted measure to address the problems. Of course, no study is without limitations, and this study also had some limitations, but it also calls for future research. The first thing is that in this study, we only did consider two set of problem contexts. We consider surface water pollution and groundwater exploitation, so this study can be extended also to another problem context to understand if the solution paths are still valid for different problem contexts as well. So that could be studied. And another thing is that the future research can also look at the interaction within these pathways and also between the conditions, because there might be also some other conditions that are playing an important role. So this could be unpacked further by having a more in-depth study. So this could be two areas for future research. Maybe some of you can follow. And with that, maybe I can finish and then pass on to our discussion, maybe before to Jens.
Okay, thanks a lot, Shahana. Really great presentation, and I'm really happy that we're having two discussants today. So I thought we sort of move maybe from science to practice, which means I would invite Graham Epstein from Waterloo University first, and then passing on to Colin Heron from GWP. So please, Graham.
Sounds good. Yes, great presentation, and it was a really good paper, and I was happy to read it. I think it's a direction that research needs to go, and to start looking at how different interactions affect outcomes. So I'm just going to provide a brief overview of my takeaways and with a few questions. We don't need to necessarily answer them right now, but as we get into the discussion, hopefully we can answer some of my questions on the paper. So as you've already mentioned, you used fuzzy set QCA to explore the elements of successful water governance, and you focused on two different problem contexts, so groundwater exploitation and surface water pollution. It might be interesting later to learn more about why you chose those particular areas, or for the audience to learn more about that, and also how you chose the elements you chose to examine. So you chose 6 elements, and certainly if I was to make a list of the important elements of effective water governance, of effective environmental governance, these would be there. Talking about institutional fit, which is where I do a lot of my work, and interplay, decentralization, that's been a theme, and it's been an evolving theme over the last several decades, with different people arguing in favor of decentralization, and then we go a little bit too far, others recognizing that, hey, hierarchies can work to solve certain problems, and your results really reaffirm that. We always talk about participation, and even if sometimes the results or the effects of participation are not always positive, that there's very democratic reasons for why we want to have participatory forms of environmental or water governance. So I think all of these are relevant. If I was to quibble, I might add things like environmental monitoring, social monitoring, so are we monitoring behavior, so on, conflict resolution. But I'll get into that a little bit later, and I understand why you chose not to include everything. There are certain methodological limitations. So for those that don't know, QCA is a particularly useful and it's increasingly used method for understanding environmental governance, understanding the design of solutions in social ecological systems, because it has several advantages over other qualitative methods. And I think the two of these, and you really show these, but it's good to reiterate to the audience for those that might be thinking about using the method, is the ability to explore interactions among several factors that the governance features, so things like participation, things like fit, don't have independent effects. Often their effects depend upon other factors. And that's just what you showed, and that's what QCA is good at doing. And the other part is that there isn't necessarily one solution, that there are multiple different pathways or configurations that can lead to success. And so, as I've already mentioned, this is really relevant for the types of cases. So it's a good method to choose for analyzing the cases that you were looking at, because it implicitly accepts some of those assumptions: interactions, multiple pathways to success. So you ended up using 43 cases, and there are three major findings that you generated. And I think the first it relates to capacity. I mean, almost every case of success, they had groups with high levels of capacity. Something that I don't think you emphasized enough was that groups were more likely to successfully address water problems if all 6 governance attributes were present. And so in your table, and I know we quickly jumped through that, but 9 of the cases, 4 of them are found in the other solution, in the other solution that's unique to surface water pollution. So I think that is a pretty strong finding, that you want most of these characteristics in place. But nonetheless, you did find that there are other potential solutions to surface water pollutions, and the first one is particularly relevant. It's showing that hierarchies can work when they are combined with high capacity for certain types of problems. And you suggest these are surface water problems. I think there might be some other attributes that might be there. So once again, I think this is a really good and interesting paper. It has potentially valuable contributions for theory and practice. What I took away is that, really reiterating what you found, is that successful water governance will generally require groups to solve several challenges. So if we want good governance, this means that you don't need to do one thing. There isn't a single, like a silver bullet. And one of the things I often see in the literature is people recommending participation as a solution, that this will solve all ills. And I think your research clearly reaffirms that is not the case, that you need other things in place. Participation might be part of the solution, and even if it isn't part of the solution, there's very, very good reasons to have participation in place, but you need to solve several governance problems simultaneously in order to achieve sustainable outcomes. And I think that's really important for policymakers to understand. You can't just do one thing. You need to consider the governance system as a whole. Capacity appears to stand out as particularly important, and that aligns with other research that I know of in marine protected areas, which found very much the same thing by a researcher named David Geul at Duke. So again, it's aligning with existing research, and perhaps capacity helps to set up these other governance institutions that are needed. People with knowledge can develop better policies that fit the context, and so on. You have participation, again, more knowledge, or you get better participation. And then that hierarchies are still useful for solving some problems was my third takeaway. The one critique I have relates to the method. And I think the most notable limitation you have related to QCA is it's limited the number of factors that you can include in a single model. You mentioned this in the paper, you're clear about that. But I think that this is an inherent limitation, and I would like you and other researchers to perhaps reflect upon this and consider whether other factors might be part of the 6-factor solution. You know, you happen to have 6 factors in your model. I wonder if you added a 7th or an 8th, if those would also turn out to be important for environmental governance. So that really is my first question, is both like, how do you select the factors, and based on your reading of the cases, because we know you read these cases, you might have found something else about them, and I'm wondering if you heard or about any other factors in that reading that may have contributed to successful outcomes. And then my second question related to hierarchies, so I'm calling them hierarchies, but I should say the absence of decentralization, because that's what you measure. Works best for simpler problems. And the example you provide also seems to be smaller in scale. The one city in Mexico is smaller in scale than the St. Lawrence River Basin, or the St. Lawrence River. And so I wonder if that's also, a potentially relevant factor that affect the effectiveness of hierarchies or the absence of decentralization. So again, I think really, really good paper. I enjoyed reading it, and thank you for inviting me talk today. And I'll pass it off, I think, to Colin, I think, at this point. Okay.
Yeah. Thanks, Graham. And yeah, Jens, did you want to introduce me, or do I introduce myself?
That's fine if you say 2 sentences yourself. Thank you, Colin.
Okay, thanks.
Happy with that.
No, perfect. Yeah, of course. No, thanks for the invitation. Thanks to Shahana for the really interesting study and analysis, and to Graham for very good discussant comments as well. So yeah, my name's Colin Heron. I'm the Senior Water Resources Management Specialist at the Global Water Partnership, GWP. So, first disclaimer, I have skin in the game regarding IWRM, which was mentioned in the study. But just briefly, I'm a Brit and a Mexican, so I'm very interested in the Mexican case, which I may say a word or two about. And yeah, based in Stockholm. But first of all, we're very happy to be here, and GWP is a partner to NEWAVE, and we have a vested interest in the outcome of this study. So I'm pleased to see that Shahana has some very interesting findings. Very briefly, at GWP, the Global Water Partnership, our vision is a water secure world, and our mission is to advance governance and management of water resources for sustainable and equitable development, end quote. So this is very important for us at GWP. The framework that we typically use is, of course, IWRM, Integrated Water Resources Management. But I think there's perhaps a fundamental misunderstanding often when we talk about IWRM. And often I get the feeling that it's taken in an evangelical sense, whereas really it's supposed to be about a process of how, not how problems are solved, but how the machinery for problem solving may be put in place. So I think that's an important consideration. Obviously, one size doesn't fit all, as the study highlights, but intuitively hearing that the governance capacity, participation, sustainability, performance, and so on lead to better outcomes, I mean, it makes a lot of sense. These are all intrinsic or implicit, perhaps, in IWRM. I'm intrigued by the finding that in some cases, decentralization, a lower degree of decentralization may lead to a better outcome. And in other cases, it may be a higher degree of decentralization. And I think there's a really good case for drilling in on that and actually just understanding even how that decentralization is defined, because I think in some of the cases, it's not a full subsidiary, should we say, delegation of authority to the lowest level. There is involvement of other levels as well. So, which points to the fact that none of these factors are binary, as much as the QCA model sort of very much implies that they be put in one of several categories. It's very, very difficult and very subjective, I think, to do so. So I think Shahana's done a very good job in categorizing these 43 cases. I wanted to pick up on something that Graham mentioned, which is the 6 factors that we use to define the water governance framework. And in the case of IWRM, we talk about there being 4 dimensions. The first is the enabling environment. And this is one thing that perhaps it's there in governance capacity, I'm not sure, but it's really about the laws and the policies and legal frameworks for water management. And that's often something that overrides any individual governance structure. no matter how efficient and how effective the governance structure may be, perhaps at a decentralized level, if the overriding policy framework is contradictory, then that may reduce the effectiveness and of the outcomes, should we say. So the enabling environment, the institutions and participation, institutions, of course, to implement the governance framework and the policy framework. The third is the management instruments. Again, what tools are available to solve any particular problem or to monitor the effectiveness of them. And of course, the financing. And that's one aspect that's key as well. It's implicit, Shahana, in some of the analyses you've mentioned here. Some of the cases, do highlight the financial setup, should we say, of some of the problem-solving mechanisms. And of course, that's key for the success of anything we do with water. I'm just looking through my notes here to make sure I'm sort of coherent and keeping within time. I wanted to say that most overriding water governance approaches like IWRM are generic in nature because they are defined to be applied across multiple geographies, political contexts, socioeconomic setups, and so on. And they are not necessarily set up per se as problem-solving mechanisms, I would say. So there's an alignment issue there that I think is really interesting to drill down on. Certainly, IWRM is not meant to be prescriptive, and I think that's the case probably for the other governance frameworks that I mentioned. And just as a quick plug in that sense, we have an IWRM Action Hub online, which I'll put the link to in the chat, which has 264 case studies and 88 tools focused on specifically how problems may be solved with this sort of umbrella approach. So I think some of those reveal interesting learnings that may be relevant. Shahana, you may have referred to this already in your identification of case studies, but if not, I would actually suggest that some of the good cases that you've highlighted would actually find their way there to get the word out beyond the participants in this webinar and those who listen online, of course. So IWM is not meant to be a panacea. I would perhaps take issue with the findings that were referred to. Not that this is Shahana's position, but she was referring to that of other papers. Again, there's no contradiction between the frameworks that exist and specific water-related problem-solving mechanisms. So I think that translation of the frameworks into the sort of the details of how problems are resolved is very interesting. I wanted to mention that the two areas that Shahana took on are, wicked problems. They're complex issues, of course, and not easy to solve. And they depend on the water governance framework, but also other frameworks, which may or may not be truly captured within the context of water governance. So if I give an example, the groundwater exploitation in agriculture may depend on, of course, biophysical factors. There may be historical factors. The legal framework may not be always favorable. The ecological aspects, how much is ecology part of the water governance framework, could be discussed, and so on. Similarly, in surface water pollution, there may be uses in energy, industry, urban waste, for example, which are areas that water governance should relate with. It doesn't always do so. So just an invitation to broaden perhaps the concept of water governance in that respect. So, and of course, for any problem such as the ones mentioned, which are wicked problems, finding a true solution requires stepping out of the water bubble, as sometimes it's referred to, which is easy to say, not easy to actually do in practice. And that is really my point. It's the frameworks are useful as a guidance, but it's how they're implemented in practice which really defines their effectiveness, I find, from a practical perspective. So one of the related thoughts I wanted to leave you with in my last minute before I shut up is that when we ourselves refer to water as a sector, sometimes we're limiting ourselves in terms of water's cross-cutting importance for so many different sectors, which in order to resolve a water-related challenge, we really need to go beyond a narrow sectoral approach and think of water in the bigger context of sustainable development. Just finally, as a water practitioner, I'm very pleased to take these results on in my work. They resonate with my experience in the field, including in the case of Mexico. It brings to mind a final thought, which is Maslow's hammer. I think often you find water organizations have a particular approach, which they love hitting every problem with. It's as if they have a hammer in their hand and everything they see is a nail. And I think we need to define that water-related problems are not always a nail. Sometimes they will be, sometimes they won't. So we do need this diversity of approaches that Shahana's very rightly pointed to. So with that, I'll yield my time. Thanks. Jens, back to you.
Yeah, great. Many thanks, both of you. I think these comments are very complementary in their nature, and which is great to have both of you really on board here, sort of with looking at the methods, but also looking at sort of the wider implications and the especially for the IWRM framework. So really very useful. I think it would be good to give Shahana like a couple of minutes maybe to respond to some of the comments made, maybe not all, because there's been a wealth of ideas, of course, and we can't tackle them all. But maybe you wish to pick some that you find you can address relatively easily before we open up to the larger audience.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Jens. And thank you, Colin and Graham. It was really, really valuable. And maybe to start with a methodological concern. So I think it's worth to highlight, first of all, that of course QCA has limitations, as Graham, you said. And I was also thinking that if you see the list of the conditions we coded, it was more than 6, and we tried to combine them somehow to make it a manageable number, because usually it's recommended to have 3 to 7 conditions. Otherwise, you end up with a solution path that is very difficult to interpret. So that was a limitation that we had while limiting the conditions to a certain number. So maybe that's another thing that we need to consider, because you're right that there might be other conditions that play a role, even like beyond the governance related conditions. Also including the governance related conditions, because I also dealt with these cases in another, let's say, context, that we were also doing a mapping of the governance characteristics of some of these contexts. And for instance, conflict resolution was another thing that came up, or trust was some other issue. So these things can also play a role, but that's beyond the scope of the study. So maybe that would be really interesting to delve into these cases more in depth. And maybe to highlight another limitation was that we only looked at the literature. So we tried to code the empirical studies. And to be honest, dealing with the cases or the literature, I also realized that how limited the information there was. So we are just relying on the author's perception or how they link the outcome with the governance. I also read one of the questions by Baltea that if we consider some other ecological factors. So that's another thing that we couldn't consider, because we tried to code the things that authors believed that this characteristics was decisive for success or failure. So that's based on the judgment of the author that we tried to rely on. So we didn't go beyond the literature or did some in-depth analysis. So something that is maybe for future research to go in depth. So maybe, yeah, that's one thing I wanted to mention about the conditions. So I completely agree. There might be other factors, 7s, 8s, or some political or beyond the ecological and governance related factors. So that's one thing. And another thing I wanted to mention on your point, Colin, I completely agree, and that's That's the lesson that we also draw in previous papers, that the frameworks are rather guidance rather than should be perceived as panacea. But what in practice, based on the literature that we see, is that sometimes the actors are taking them as it is, and we can see different interpretation of them. So which then also result in a different effectiveness that we see of them, if they really true to the outcome or not. So yeah, I completely agree, and also emphasize this, that we need to treat these paradigms as a guidance and try to be also critical with them and reflect on them, rather than take it as it is and then implement them in a certain way, because it also involves some power issues there, how we interpret certain things. As you said, like participation can be interpreted also differently. It can involve people and then discuss things without really making anything in the decision making, and then call it a participation because it's very buzzword and it's required by the projects. And also it's important that you have to have, but in the end it doesn't really translate as a participation in practice. So yeah, it's something that we need to be aware of. With this, maybe I can conclude and then pass on to Jens.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think those are two thoughts that we can should follow up maybe also. But we can also open now, I think, to the larger audience. And I see that there are two comments already in the chat. Can you see them as well, Shahana? So I think there's one question made by Bota. This is, I think, very relevant. So the question of what are, non-governance related factors, because we focus on governance here. I mean, also looking at the context, obviously, but I think that's maybe something to reflect on. So is there any thoughts you would like to share on that, Shahana?
The comment by Bota, right? For
yes.
The question. Yeah, I think it goes back to what Graham said. There might be other factors as well, and we cannot consider all the factors. And it's also beyond our ability, because, as I said, we only limited our analysis to our data was coming from the literature, and we didn't do extra case study, and we were relying on the judgment of the author that was linking the governance with an outcome and try to make analysis out of it. So I agree that there might be other factors that is beyond the governance factors, definitely ecological factors, because the socio-ecological system is also very complex, and we couldn't consider social factors, for instance, as well. It's not just ecological factors, but social as well. So yeah, definitely I agree that there might be other factors that we didn't account in our analysis, but that is something that the future research can reflect on and go in depth of I try to also understand this interaction between these conditions that we came up with, that is in the solutions that we have.
Yeah, thank you. Then there is another comment by Teresa, which you may have addressed already when we were talking about the factors of what counts as capacity. I mean, also Colin, you made lots of questions on what really is in there and how does it relate, let's say, to the IWM factors. And there, of course, different aspects could figure as capacity. And I think here we also see, if I may, sort of also like a little limitation of this kind of studies, where you have to limit the number of variables, which means that you try to integrate different items into variables, but that, of course, some of these items might actually be individual aspects that may not be able to be being combined in any case. So and here maybe we're having the same situation. So enabling environment capacity. What about interplay, for example? But is there anything specific that you'd like to add to that, Shahana?
You summarize well. Maybe one thing on the interplay, and Colin, correct me if I'm wrong, but while we were coding for interplay, we were also looking at if there is a cross sector and cross level coordination, which translate into the policies. So if they don't have any coordination across levels and sectors, then the policies are also fragmented, and they can also make it very challenging as a part of enabling environment. So I think we were somehow accounting for that. And yeah, please jump in, Colin, if I miss something. That's my take on that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the policy framework for water may involve decentralization and may be effective, but there are also other policy frameworks at play. Maybe an agricultural policy or an urban expansion policy or other similar policies that may affect the outcomes and which, in theory, should be captured as part of this broad enabling environment, quote unquote. But yeah, they may be sort of, again, slightly outside the realm of control for a water governance scheme or even a water governance paradigm. So yeah, it's a very good question. How much the policy framework for water, can be covered by the enabling environment, but it's not always that effective, should we say, in looking across different policy frameworks at the macro level. Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, one final comment here on trust and levels of collaboration, whether they were considered aspects of effective governance. Not sure if they were, but maybe some concrete notes from you, Shahana.
Yeah, trust, unfortunately not. We didn't capture it, but as I previously mentioned, that was also something that was recurring, but we cannot consider all the conditions, so that was the limitation. And yeah, but the trust, I mean, in some cases, it wasn't very common among the cases that we examined, so it might be in maybe 10 cases or so in general out of 165. But yeah, this could be one of the factors, definitely, but we didn't consider it as a part of our analysis. But it's one of the things that's also I would consider it as an aspect of effective governance. Regarding the collaboration, while reading the comment, I was thinking like collaboration among whom? Because if it is collaboration across levels, then it can be captured with an interplay, or sectors, it can be captured with an interplay, or collaboration with non-state actors, then it can be captured with participation. So we didn't code for collaboration per se, but I assume that the factors or the conditions that we had can somehow address the level of collaboration with different actors. So yeah, that would be my answer to that. I hope it did a good job.
Yeah, thank you. So I don't see any more comments. Thank you very much for all commentators, especially to Colin and Graham, to all the participants. Yeah, any final words from Shahana or from Katarina?
Yeah, I would just wanted to thank all of you for the insights that you have provided, because it's such a unique opportunity to also share the results of this study and then get a feedback from practitioner side and also on the methodological and also theoretical side from Graham. It was very, very valuable, and also to hear the feedback from the audience was very, very nice, and wanted to thank you, all of you.
Yeah, and thank you again from my side as well. There were also comments on, can we get the paper? And I think you responded already. So it's currently under review, hopefully out soon. And then, of course, it's available to be read. And I think do address Shahana directly on that once the paper is out. Great, many thanks. Thanks, Katarina. Or you do have a final word. Okay, so I pass to you.
Thank you so much, Jens. Yes, I always have final words to say. So thank you so much, everyone. It was very interesting to hear about the work done by Shahana, but also the insights that you all had, and also how your different roles cooperate in these aspects. I would like actually to remind you of the upcoming seminars. So the next one, this appointment was actually the first one after the holiday break, and we will continue in 2 weeks' time, this time at 4 p.m. So please make sure you have the updated invitation in your calendar, with Hannah Porada, with her seminar titled From Place-Based Resistance Against Extractivism to Translocal Environmental Justice Struggles. There will be discussion by Guadalupe Garcia Padro and Dr. Nienke Busker, with remarks from Professor Jeroen Vos. And we will continue until the end of the year. Let me see if I can move on. Yes. You can find the updated schedule of the seminars, with the ongoing information is being updated on our website. In the meantime, if you also want to watch the recordings of the previous sessions, you can find them on the NEWAVE YouTube channel. And I will take also the opportunity to thank our host institutions and the partner organizations of NEWAVE. And of course, I want to thank you all once again